I do is mergers and acquisitions primarily and financing consultancy. So I essentially match investment needs and investment dollars. Have been dealing in plastics for a very long time. It is only recently that I saw an uptick in private equity in particular, having an interest in investing in the recycling space. And so as we started working with it more and more, we started tracking it methodically. And that's the result that you're going to see right now. So we're going to talk about market trends, themes in recycling, a few case studies which demonstrate that the big money is now following recycling in a big way. And so not only does it appeal to the constituents that believe in a cleaner environment, but it also appeals to the economics of it. And we'll talk about some valuations in the space. So the most interesting part of this particular slide is the fact that recycled plastics is growing at 13.5%, and regular plastics or virgin plastics is growing at about 5%. So therein lies your high-level macro opportunity. If you are an investor, you want to position yourself in the recycled plastic space. I challenge you to find growth rates north of 6% in a mature industry like the plastic space. So 13.5% to me sounds pretty attractive. Plastics, or recycled plastics, or plastics that we throw away is so abundant that it is, to me, staggering that we still haven't figured out how to make money out of it. If you look at the top right, about $80 billion worth of plastic is thrown away or burnt. 80 to 100 billion, that's your opportunity set. There is 80 to 100 billion dollars of revenue to be had on a global basis in the recycled plastic space. If you look at the recovery rates, it's abysmal. If you look at metals, they've done a fantastic job of coming up the recovery rates, but plastics is still languishing, 10, 20, pick a number in the low end of that spectrum. So again, there's a tremendous opportunity set. This to me is proof positive that if you're private equity, you're venture capital, you're an investor, you want to go after recycled plastics based on the opportunity size and based on the growth rates we talked about in the previous page. And Doug is going to make this available on the website, so I just wanted to touch on the highlights, and you can download this once he's put it up on the website. It is really interesting to look at the steel industry. So, call it 30 or 40 years ago, steel was where we are today with plastics. If you look at the percent of recycled steel that's being used in manufacturing, it's north of 50%. And they're making good money doing that. So on the chart, you see gross margins up to the top, right? You're looking at 25% gross margins doing recycled steel. And it took them, a long time to get to that spot, but they did. And it's really across the metal spectrum, the percentage of recycled metal that's being used in manufacturing is north of 50%. And plastic, it's not even close. So again, another data point to say that it's a place you want to be. The biggest source of recycled plastics is going to be cars, automobiles, down the road. There is an increasing percentage of cars that is now plastic. And along with directives in Europe which say that the whole car needs to be recycled. And the fact that you have all these plastics stuck in the car, if you can figure out a way to extract that plastic and recycle it, every major manufacturer is going to line up behind you. And the chemistry is not that complicated. There are electrostatic properties, and I'm just a finance guy here now, but having just worked with technical people, you don't have to be the Google of recycling. You just have to just work with it and invest resources and time and R&D into this. And there is a way to extract plastic out of whether it's automobiles, whether it's durable goods. But this automobile is going to be a huge source of recycled plastic down the road, especially in places like China and India, where the growth rates in automobiles is just staggering. So why companies invest in recycling? Now this is an emerging trend, and we're starting to see this more and more. You control the supply chain and commodity costs. Recycling has been hit hard lately because commodity prices dropped, but that was not always the case. There were times when recycled plastics was a valuable part of the supply equation for a company. Abundant raw material, it's almost limitless. We use so much plastics that, especially in the municipal waste side, that we'll never run out of source material if we decide to go this route. There's increasing regulations and restrictions around the world about how we dispose of our plastics. Europe is leading the way. We're lagging behind, way behind, because we have so much land. It's cheap to throw away stuff in America, and we're really good at throwing away stuff. About a decade ago, we were talking about how we're going to run out of space in our landfills. But people like Waste Management and folks who manage landfills have become so good at it that we're managing to pack so much material into it. So the economics, again, in the United States, or North America in particular, haven't really caught up with that of Europe. There isn't a lot of land in Europe. There's a lot of regulation, a lot of awareness, and that's driving some of the recovery initiatives over there across the pond. And you folks, you're driving recycling. Unfortunately, you're not speaking with your wallet yet. You're not willing to pay more for recycled products. And therein lies the whole problem. I think if we figure out a way to supply you, the consumer, recycled plastic-based material, which costs the same as virgin plastic, then we have a winner in our hands. And the increased use of recycled content in applications and end markets, which is kind of a catch-all statement there. The regulatory environment is a driving factor. I don't think, people confuse regulations with economics. The regulatory environment is useful in starting the dialogue and having this particular dialogue, but at the end of the day, the economics have to come through. Factors affecting recycling or investment in recycling is commodity prices for sure, legislation across the globe. China was pretty much taking any waste that the West was generating, but they have woken up to the fact that that wasn't really good for them. So they put in the Green Fence and National Sword initiatives, which basically said you can't send them our crap. And that has made a difference. The bales that are being produced in North America and that are getting shipped over is of high quality. The supply chain has gotten rationalized, and it has really improved the quality of materials that can now be used for recycling plastics. I talked about this, technology and expertise. We need smart people in the room to spend some time and money thinking about how to extract plastics out of your computers, out of your dishwashers, your refrigerators. There's a ton of plastics. You walk into a house, you see it everywhere. So just, universities, I think they're spending a lot of money there, but I think more and more of that effort will bring down the cost of reclaiming plastics. Some case studies. Veolia is I'm sure you're familiar with this company. They have invested an extraordinary amount of money into plastics recycling operations. Again, I'll let you read this at your leisure once it's up on the website. Ravago is a compounder that's based in Europe, and they have done an extraordinary job of working with recycled plastics. Again, a large public company in the business of making money, if you will. They're there for their shareholders' benefit, and they're making money using recycled plastics. So a good success story there. In the US, you have examples of companies that are getting into recycling. Consolidated Container bought a recycling asset. Consolidated Container Company is actually a converter. So they take resin and they make stuff out of it. But they thought it was important enough to vertically integrate into recycled resin products. Playcon is a mid-sized company, and the reason I highlight that is it's not one of the big major plastics companies, but they decided that it was economically viable to have a recycle operation within their company. Some examples in Asia. Kingfa is a big Chinese company, has really focused its efforts in recycled plastics, as has Wistron. This is going to be an increasing trend where you have Western companies and Chinese companies working together because they manufacture over there and there's a lot of resin being produced over here, so it is an inevitable trend. I have some statistics out here, but essentially, if you look back over time, recycled companies were trading at lower multiples. I don't know if that, for some of you, that may not mean much, but essentially companies are valued based on several methodologies. And one of the methodologies is a multiple of earnings. So if you look over time, the multiples that are being paid for recycling companies that extract plastic out of municipal waste or post-industrial waste, that has been going up. And which again speaks to the fact that it has become an increasingly profitable place to be for investors. So with that, I'll pause.
All right. Thank you. Ricardo.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, a bit of a rush in with planes. You kind of try and gauge it with LA traffic, which is impossible, but anyway, I made it. I think what I wanted to talk about is, I think we come to the same conclusion, Uday and I, that there's an investment opportunity here, but we come at it from a slightly different perspective.
Can we switch this? Yeah.
As you heard, my company is a kind of different type of asset management firm, and we were created basically to try to come up with investment opportunities that are both good for investors as well as good for social and environmental issues. So we approach this from the problem and the opportunity that lies in that problem. As Uday said, it's unconscionable that we are throwing away this much value. When you put it into billions of barrels of oil, that's what we're throwing away here. We're throwing away barrels of oil, and there's a ton of value there, and we just haven't found the way to economically access that value. And so I think it's an incredibly important opportunity. It is a crisis. There's no doubt about it that there's a crisis out there. I mean, just looking at the issue from the perspective of oceans, which is what we were asked to look at. We were asked to look at, how do you address the problem of plastic going into the ocean? And when we started looking at the issue, I mean, I had an idea that there was a problem. Just anybody who goes to any beach anywhere in the world knows there's a problem. But I had no idea the scale of it. To get you a sense of what we're talking about here, we're talking about 8 million tons of plastic going into the ocean every year, estimated. It could be more, it could be less, but it's probably more. Just to put that in perspective, imagine that you took 5 Whole Foods bags full of plastic, stacked them up, one on top of each other, and put one of those stacks of 5 bags for every foot of coastline on the planet. That's 8 million tons of plastic. And that's how much plastic is going into the ocean every year. And that's a fraction of the plastic waste we're generating. So the size and the scale of the opportunity is tremendous. So we were approached by a number of people who were interested in how do you address this problem through investment, and they basically came to us with all these ideas. They'd heard about the plastic gyres, they'd heard about all these problems, and they were like, well, how do we solve this problem? Do we go out and do we clean up the plastic gyres? What do we do? And we started doing the research, and we said, look, we don't think that's the solution, because if you take all of the plastic gyres out there, and the one we hear about in the North Pacific is just one. There's about 5 of them in every ocean. If you could wave a magic wand tomorrow and get rid of all the plastic in all those 5 gyres, you would basically only be impacting somewhere on the order of 8 to 12% of the plastic that is going into the ocean each year. Each year. So, you know, this problem goes way beyond those gyres. And in order to address this problem, we're going to have to solve this problem on land. We're going to have to solve this problem in the sort of ways that Uday was talking about. We're going to have to use plastic better, change the type of plastic we use, and manage our waste in a big way. And just to give you another sense of the scale and the magnitude of the problem, the majority of the plastic waste going into the ocean, so about 50% of it, is coming from about 5 countries in Asia, right? China, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam. So, you know, we do a decent job in developed countries of managing that plastic so it doesn't get into the ocean. I'm not saying we do a decent job in managing it generally. We could do a much, much better job of reusing it, recycling it, managing it in all kinds of different ways. But if we're going to address the problem in the oceans, then we're going to have to solve that problem on land, and we're probably going to have to solve that problem in at least those 5 countries. So what we came to is that there's a tremendous opportunity here. And what we decided to do was look at the entire plastics value chain and ask ourselves, where are the impact opportunities? Where could you invest money profitably in ways that affect this value chain to, not just stem the bleeding, but turn the patient around and try and cure things here. And what we started off with was we said, okay, you can take plastics value chain and start all the way from the material engineering, from the design of the actual material, through the design of the products that use the material, through the consumer use, through the collection, through the recycling, through the conversion and disposal, all the way to what we called last chance capture, so before it gets into the ocean, capturing it before it gets to the ocean. And we looked at where are there opportunities for investment here. And just to cut to the chase, in our report called Sea of Opportunity is public and is out there, and you can read it and you can download it from our website. And we go into all of this in much more detail. But just to skip to the punchline is that if we're going to address this problem, there are probably 2 places that we need to focus our efforts where there are potential investment opportunities. And we only began looking at what those opportunities might be. The first place, if you care about plastic pollution and plastic waste, is in changing the material engineering and coming up with new alternatives to plastic that are more benign. And this involves not just the plastic itself, it involves additives, right? And many people don't focus on many of the additives that are put into plastic to make it clear, to make it colored, to make it all these different things. Those not only mess up recycling and lower the value that you can extract in recycling, but some of them are toxic and harmful in lots of different ways. So we need to come up with better ways of doing that. And this does not mean that we're going to do away with plastic. Don't kid yourself. Plastic is an incredibly useful material. It's got tremendous valuable properties, so I'm not advocating that we get rid of it, but we need to find other alternatives that are better in other ways, right? And so I think there's an investment opportunity there, and it's a venture capital investment opportunity, high risk, potentially high return. But this isn't going to change the problem in the oceans for a while. It's going to take a while for that to filter through into the issue in the ocean. So you need another strategy, and that strategy has to do with waste management, largely in those 5 countries that I talked about initially, but probably everywhere. And that is a much more difficult, also risky investment opportunity that looks like private equity investments in emerging markets. It looks like investments in the technologies that make recycling, depolymerization, waste to energy, all kinds of ways to extract the value out of that plastic, make them more technically feasible and economically feasible and able to be used in those countries. Because the truth is that when you look at the problem in Indonesia, in the Philippines, the issue is that waste collection and waste management costs a lot of money. And it's heavily subsidized by government, because if you ask people to basically pay what it's worth to collect waste, in most parts of the world, they would avoid the collection. They would essentially dump illegally. So we need to figure out a way to not let that happen. So, so we've identified basically investment opportunities, companies, other investment vehicles in each of these steps in the value chain. We've analyzed them to some degree, not to the degree we would like to, and looked at, what are the risk-return profiles of those investment opportunities? Can you make money? How much? For a certain level of risk. And that's even beyond the sort of stuff you were talking about, Uday, which I think is also a tremendous investment opportunity in how you deal with recycling. Because if you can make it work here, then you can transfer that technology in ways. If you can lower the cost curve of that technology and other technologies to get value out of plastic has to come down. And we have to figure out ways to make use of that value. Because again, we're just throwing away billions and billions of dollars and billions of barrels of oil just like that. And not only are we losing this potential value for us as a society, we're creating serious problems. Anybody who's gone, to any beach anywhere in the world, and it's not just, beaches around places that you would consider polluting. Now plastic is everywhere. I don't know if you guys saw that article that came out a couple of months back where they were analyzing, some of the microorganisms and the plankton at the bottom of the Marianas Trench, and guess what? They found plastic. At the bottom of the Marianas Trench, about as far away from humans as you can imagine, there's plastic there, because guess what? Of that 8 million tons, only a tiny fraction of it ends up in those gyres in the Pacific. Vast majority of it sinks, decomposes, ends up in the organisms, and guess where it ends up? It ends up in fish and in seafood, and we eat it. So we're eating our trash. So the choice basically is, do we want to continue to eat plastic in that way, or do we want to find a way to capture and make value and invest in different ways that will, I think, change this trajectory and make money for people who are involved in changing this trajectory? I think there's a possibility here, and once we start making money, others will follow, and I think we're going to get into a virtuous cycle. And this is a problem that, may not be in the minds of many people as big as, call it, climate change or other things, but it is a problem that is actually in many ways more tangible to a lot of people, and one that you can see, and one that I think we can actually solve in our lifetime, or at least go a very long way towards solving in our lifetime. But it's going to take a concerted effort, and it's not just about investment, it's about policies, it's about changes in consumer behavior, but there is an investment opportunity here. So after doing this analysis, we realized that there is a way, we think, to make money for our investors and address this problem. So we're continuing to explore this and looking and talking with potential investors and impact investors, because that's the other trend that's out there. There's been a huge growth in impact investment worldwide. And this is because there's a lot of the, you take the 400 some odd trillion dollars of financial assets that are spread around the world, there's a portion of that that is interested in not just making a return, but also having an impact. And if they can do both, then it's great. And even if it's a tiny percentage of that 400 trillion, it's still a lot of money. So we believe that there's investors, and you wouldn't believe the interest we've gotten from potential investors. Say, if you come up with these strategies, if you create vehicles around these strategies, we will be interested in investing. So that challenge, the gauntlet has been thrown. We're trying to come up with these investments. We're doing deeper due diligence on what are the companies, what do they look like, how can you invest in them, what are the risk-return profiles of all of these companies, and hopefully at some point in the next couple of years we'll have a vehicle that is investing somewhere on this plastic supply chain. But I think, just to tell you, this is a tremendous opportunity. No matter where you engage in this plastic supply chain, huge opportunities there for investment and for changing, frankly, some of the biggest problems we face in our planet. So I'll leave it at that, Doug.
Thank you, Ricardo. Another challenge to the brand owners is making that product sexy and not just using a cheap material. So my suit, for example, is made out of plastic bottles, the whole suit. So I would argue that the value of this suit made from 70 bottles, or whatever the number is more than the value of those 70 bottles was when it was a bottle. And so the challenge is how to get the brand managers in to be selling these products in a great way to get people interested. So is this something that both of you, in your strategies for plastic investing, would you be looking at those type of products and companies as well to be creating the pull from the recycled content?
Yeah, I mean, we had an entire section of the report dedicated to design and products and how you actually design to make recycling easier, because part of the problem is when we design our products, we're not thinking about what happens to them at end of life. I think we need more feedback loops to think that. And what you're talking about, upcycling, is a very important part of what needs to happen to give value to that recycled plastics. But it goes further than that, I think. I think we need to find different business models to use plastic, because a huge part of the problem, at least if you look at it from an ocean perspective, is low-value plastic. The bottles, those tend to get collected in those 5 countries I talked about. Not in the way we collect them, but through waste pickers, which are an important part of the economy in many of those countries. And they collect them, a large portion of them, because they're worth something. You can actually sell those and recycle them. The thin films don't have that value to weight to bulk ratio that make it so that they're collected. So those are the things that tend to get thrown away. But most of those are being used in shipping and packaging. Instead of thinking, okay, I'm delivering a product to you and I'm UPS or whoever I am, and I'm going to pack it with whatever plastic I need to protect what I'm delivering to you, and then it's your problem, can we think of business models that are more plastic as a service, right? What the service we want is protection of those things that I'm delivering to you. So I'll sell you the service of delivering that. The plastic is then mine, and then I have to figure out a way to use it multiple times because then I will make more value. So these kinds of changes in the way we think of how we use plastic and upcycling and adding value are, I think, where we're going to get real change.
Uday, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, so look, when we look at a metal object, right, you do not see a sticker which says 70% recycled content. It is an accepted fact that there is a significant portion of recycled content in a metal object. You know, look around at your chairs, what have you. I think plastics or recycled plastics is going to get there. My hope is in the next 5 years, through the investment cycle and through the attention that private equity and other investors are placing on recycled plastics, that 80 or $100 billion that we're throwing away starts getting into plastics manufacturing. And my hope and my view and my bet, and the reason I'm spending a lot of time in this space, is that we're going to get to a point where your laptops, your cars, they're just going to have recycled resin in them. PCABS, ABS, polyethylene, polypro. And if you get to that point, then the upcycle becomes easy. Then you can make, you know, jackets, swimming gear, what have you, from recycled plastics content. And you don't have to think about whether it was virgin plastics or recycled plastics. And I think therein lies the challenge for this room. The technology exists, whether it's extraction technology, whether it's collection technology, whether it's compounding technology, it exists today. It just doesn't exist in the scale that we need for it to be economical. And I think as we start using more and more of it, we'll get to a point where it becomes second nature.
Great. So I'm going to ask 2 more questions, and then if anyone in the room has something. Ricardo or Jessica, if one of you can grab the microphone, or Bob, and just, yeah. So in the developing world and in much of the world where you have these issues that are like distributed power, where the villages and the towns have a waste issue, you can't necessarily take a big super duper machine and give them recycling 101, you know, for $500 million. So one is, what is the minimum value of an investment that the people you're talking to are willing to make, and what is their appetite to go to these far-off municipalities that really need to get these problems fixed, but that do not have super big needs in terms of machinery and equipment at the level that the Asian Development Bank or the World Bank would fund?
That's a tough one. So where we stand right now, so we're representing a company for sale that extracts plastics out of municipal waste, out of what we call waste electronics and electrical equipment. I think that's what it stands for. So they basically take, so if you think about these laptops, which you will throw away in a couple of years, or the phones that you've thrown away, iPhone 4s, if you remember those, that you've thrown away, they get chopped up. The metal recyclers take the metal out of it, and then they throw away the rest, which is all plastics. So the company that we're representing for sale takes that stuff and extracts a bunch of plastics out of it. So they've really taken dirt and turned it into plastics. So through that, so using that as an anecdotal evidence, we think, we as a STIFEL investment bank and some of the bankers who work in the recycle space, that for the Suez's, the waste managements, the Ravagos of the world to take attention, to pay attention, it needs to be about $5 million of profit, or we call it EBITDA, for it to get attention. But that's on a mature company scale. If you drop below that, where Ricardo's from, San Francisco, I'm hoping the venture capital world starts funding small-scale recycle operations. The Foy group that presented in Dallas is a great example of that. It's not a very expensive unit. You know, they have a unit that costs $20 million, but it produces an incredible level of profit at certain levels of diesel prices, arguably, where they're taking plastic, municipal plastic waste, and turning it into road-ready diesel. That's not very expensive. And so I think, if to answer your question, there are two separate categories in the investment community right now. One is the mature level, where I think it's about $5 million of EBITDA or profit, and then the venture cap, the world is your oyster. Anything get funded as long as you can make an economic case for that. I don't know what you're saying, Ricardo.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the venture capital and the funding will go to some of these technologies, and some of them still need to be perfected. I mean, there's been many questions about emissions and pollution from some waste to energy technologies. Some of them are still extremely expensive. You know, bringing down the cost curve, bringing down the health and the pollution standards of these things, you need investment in those technologies. That's great. But I do think there are enough investors out there that could be interested in sort of the smaller deals, aggregated, yes, up to the several $1 million level, but in smaller deals in emerging markets. It wasn't too long ago that everybody poo-pooed microcredit as an industry, right? And microcredit is now a pretty large business, and in fact, the people that are taking microcredit pay back better than most people pay back. You know, their repayment rates are higher than a lot of other than your traditional banks, and people didn't realize that. And I think there are incredible opportunities, not just for investors from Europe and the US in emerging markets, but I think there's incredible opportunities for emerging market investors in emerging markets. And I think there's going to be new companies, smaller companies, that emerge in these emerging markets to deal with these problems, because the problems are getting big enough. I think one key to this transition is actually going to be, at least in these countries that I talked about, it's going to be the waste pickers and how you deal with waste pickers and how you manage them and how they aggregate and how they get better standards of living for doing what they do, because they do a tremendous amount of recycling in these emerging markets. Like I said, you don't see many of the PET bottles coming into the MRFs because they've been picked before they get there. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here, but some of it will take people that are willing to take risks, because many of these things have never been done.
Right.
Somebody had to take a risk in the first microcredit. I think somebody's going to have to take a risk in the first sort of waste picker collaborative company that emerges in these places.
Right. So I think that's a bit of a challenge for all of us. One of the things in this space we all need is good case studies, and that doesn't matter if it's in a developing country or developed in a big company or small company. But the more that we can show that these things work in whatever the solutions we're providing and at scale, and the prices come down, it will come down more, then that's when you're going to get the chance to aggregate these solutions and replicate them and take them to a new place. So one of the things we talked about on Earth Day Texas with a different group than Plasticity, but I want to bring this up because it's something that maybe I can talk to some of you about later. There's a group out there that's really working on clean tax cuts, and that is for US federal tax cut idea that would give incentive for anything green to be invested in. That includes air, water, soil, agriculture, and they wanted to talk about plastic. So if you put that in the plastic space, and there are clean tax cuts that would be associated with your investment in new recycling technology, in investment in recycled content or new design, anything that sort of fits in that zone of being environmentally improving, that can drive in new investment. Investors would also get benefits from this. And it's something that if this plan were adopted, it could actually be replicated in other countries. And so we may be doing a small workshop about this topic in New York for Ocean Week in the first week of June. So I'm throwing that out as a sort of a bit of an invite. But I'm wondering from both of you, with the green bond market that is increasing so much in Europe and now in Asia, do you see this and maybe the chance of some kind of green tax credit, would that really build the momentum on the investment cases that you're working on now? Do you see that as being beneficial in your space?
Look, I think anything we can do like that is great and will help. But quite frankly, the issue we've seen out there is that the problem's not the money. The money's out there. The problem is we haven't found the deals that make sense from an investment perspective. So I think what we really need is people out there finding investable deals and making investable deals and making deals investable, because I think they're out there. We just haven't found them. I think the green bond market is a signal that, as I said, this growth and impact investment, the change in the way we manage our money is huge, and it started with SRI, and I see Conrad in the audience. There's people here who have been involved in this for many, many years, decades even. And it's growing, and we're heading into the biggest transfer of wealth in the history of humanity, right? When basically baby boomers transfer the management of wealth to their children. And every data point we have is that when wealth management changes hands, the way that wealth is managed changes. And one of the ways that wealth is being managed that's changing is this interest in this type of impact investing. And you're seeing it in the green bond markets. What to me the green bond market is a signal that there is demand for something that is labeled green. Never mind that half of those green bonds are probably going to things that would have gotten regular bonds in the past,
Yeah.
right? A Prius plant for Toyota would have gotten a standard old bond. They just put a label on it that's green, and people like it, right? And people buy it. And what we're finding is people aren't paying a premium for the green bonds. They just sell quicker, which is important if you're a banker, right? And so people are interested in putting out these green bonds. And some of them are even going to, coal trains in China. So we can argue about whether that's green or not, but I think what you really need to do is take that demand for green investment products, which I think will only grow, and channel it into the types of deals that will make a difference in the things we care about. Whether it's recycling, whether it's getting plastics out of the ocean, whether it's stopping it from getting into the ocean, whether it's venture capital in the technologies that will allow us to extract value from that waste, or the recycling, or, there's a lot of places on this value chain that you can invest in, and you got to pick one, or a few, but I think the money isn't really the problem.
Great. Uday, do you have anything?
Yeah, the raging capitalist in me says that it's tough to make an investment case based on regulation, right? But having said that, at the margin, it makes a huge difference. You start a conversation, you maybe create a demand pull based on regulation. You see that in Europe to a very large extent. So it absolutely makes a difference at the margins. And I think I cannot emphasize enough that if you feel strongly about this, speak up, participate, because it only helps my guys.
Great.
Make money.
Well, I hope you can be there. Questions from the floor? Anyone? Anyone's got a burning investment in the back here?
That's right.
Wait, the mic's coming back.
Yeah, hi, I'm John Gogol. I started a company back in 2001 called PC Plastics, post-consumer plastics, and I made my resin out of styrofoam. One of my first customer was Panasonic and HP. I developed it at Epson. So I went around myself and looked for venture capital, and I had a really difficult time. I did probably, I don't know, 4 or 5, I tried to do 4 or 5 deals, and the biggest problem was that the investors were afraid of investing in the commodity.
Yep.
I heard that over and over and over again. So do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, I mean, it is a tough area, no doubt. And I think, you know, one of the biggest problems we've seen in recycling over the last 2 decades has been the price of oil. You've seen, you know, recycling plants suffer through that. So from an investor's perspective, they were right. You know, commodities can be dangerous, the ups and down prices of commodity. And here you're dealing with the impacts of, you know, the price of oil on the price of recycled plastics, which are two-edged, right? Not just in the demand for your product, but also in the competition from virgin plastics and the price of virgin plastics, and the need of places like Saudi Arabia and other places to actually use oil in different ways that are higher value. And all anecdotal evidence is that they're building huge plastic plants. So from a problem perspective, the problem's only going to get worse. From a recycler's perspective and an investor's perspective, you know, this just shows you how commodity prices can kill you. So they're right, but I do think that there are investors out there willing to take a risk. And as I think if we see this growth of this impact investing or the green bonds or others, I think there are investors out there who are seeing this not only as an investment that could make money, but as an investment that has an impact on a big social environmental issue. So, you know, what we've seen out there in this space and in other spaces is that it really isn't about the money, right? You know, we did a survey of people who are investing in conservation, and the answer we got to that survey was there's a bunch of money, several $billion of people that are investing in conservation, but hey, there's several $billion that are still sitting in their pockets that they've raised but haven't invested. Now, if you know anything about the asset management business, having money in your pocket is a big problem. It hits your IRRs, it hits your returns, it's a problem. So for them not to invest that money means they're not finding the deals they like. And we asked them and they're like, most of the deals we're seeing aren't really investable. They don't have a return. They come, you know, environmentalists or others come to us and they say, hey, look at this great deal, but it doesn't have a return. So how are we going to invest in that, right? And so they said our problem is deals, is track record of the management that's putting that money to work, and it's the risk return profile of those deals. So, I mean, I think where you might be able to use some of the tax money that you can come up with is in changing that dial of the risk return profile to get people more comfortable with investing in these types of solutions. Maybe helping out with the risk, guarantees, that sort of thing could be a really interesting use of that.
Great.
Capital.
So, you know, if I can just add to that, John, I think you were 10 years too early. It's my sense. Today, it's a different discussion with investors. The company that we're in the market with for now, for example, you know, we're talking about how they've performed with the resin curve, and we have showed that it's not divorced from that, and yes, they're susceptible to the risks of commodity prices, but it's not that they're completely out of whack. So there are investors who are comfortable with taking commodity risk, and so once you have checked that box, then it becomes easy to speak to them about the recycling operation, if that makes sense.
Cost of recovery to extract that material, and then if you do it in an efficient way and you capture it at the beginning in a better way, it should be price competitive, and that is an area that we should be investing in. Is that chain of command where you don't have to go through all the sorting and cleaning and stuff that most of the world does today, which is what makes it more expensive than the oil.
Yeah.
So that's maybe an area. Ed, you had a question?
Yes, Edward Coase from Nextech. First of all, thank you for the very refreshing views from people from the finance and banking sectors. It's really, you've picked all the key points that are impinging on our lack of success in recycling. Just following on from John's comment, we have this problem with the price of oil and the price of recycled plastics. It seems to suggest there's a market failure here because the price of recycled plastics doesn't depend on oil.
Correct.
Precisely. It depends on collection systems, the efficiency of the reprocessing and so on. So we know what those factors are. So should we be looking for mechanisms where we can separate the price that people expect to pay for recycled plastics from the price of virgin plastics. Because at the moment, we've got competition between those two. And this is really what's killing the recycling operations. In United Kingdom, I think I can count 6 recycling companies that went under in the last 18 months. And these are all big, novel, entrepreneurial, efficient recycling technologies. But they just couldn't take the pace with the low price of oil. And oil is low. It's extraordinarily low right now. Here we have a scarce commodity that we know is finite. You know, we should be using it for plastics, not for cars. You know, but we've got this unusual system right now, the way we consider the price of virgin and recycled. So can we dissociate the two costs and consider recycled material in some way different? And it probably means some sort of a new market system. So I'm interested to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, so again, I keep going back to this company that we're working with. Look, fundamentally, recycled resin, right? Let's just pick ABS or polypro. You can't help but compete with virgin, right? So if you are HP and you're putting your laptop casing together, HP is going to say, which resin gives me the impact characteristics that I need when I drop the laptop on the ground, right? And so if you go to HP and say, I can sell you recycled plastics at 80% of virgin, and oh, by the way, you get the same properties, done, right? You're sold and you're making money. But that's when it falls apart, because your cost structure, if it doesn't support that, you're screwed. So, and that is the tension. So I think what needs to happen and what people are focused on is figuring out how to make that end product that you're selling, Hewlett-Packard or Dell or whoever it is, indistinguishable from virgin plastics. The chemistry of it, the technology behind it. I think if that happens, and if you have a handle on the cost structure, because the cost structure can be really attractive. If you're taking municipal waste, if you're taking shredded electronic residue, for example, and you're buying it from the metal recyclers, you're basically getting it for free. So if you can figure out your cost structure and you can figure out the technology, you know, I'm giving you BS MBA 101 answers, right? But unfortunately, I don't control the technology. You know, I wish that the smart people in this room came up with the technology. But that's where the companies need to get to, that you compete with virgin resin, indistinguishable from the virgin resin, and you have a cost advantage. That's what makes you the winner. In terms of answering your question about creating a separate market, there have been attempts to do that. There has been a recycling resin index that some people have attempted. Unfortunately, it again breaks when the customer says, oh, I'm not going to pay you for that. You know, I'm not going to pay you 10% extra because your costs are 10% higher. So you have to figure out both the cost side and the end product side, unfortunately. There's no way of divorcing it from the virgin pricing. It's just not going to happen.
I mean, I do think that there is the issue of demand, right? And in the sense that if we can create a premium like we've created for organics, for recycled in some way, then you might be able to change that gap slightly. We haven't seen a huge amount of that yet, but it could come as the plastic problem globally becomes even bigger and bigger. The other issue is absolutely, Doug is 100% correct, that on the cost of collection and getting that down and figuring out what are some of the other ancillary benefits of the type of collection we're talking about, which is essentially, you know, it can even be as simple as a wet-dry collection system, which could make a huge difference. And if you do this sort of wet-dry, organic, everything else kind of collections, you could lower the cost of recycling considerably, and you might actually have a product to sell on the compost side. So in the US, we've seen the same pressure from the lower costs of oil impinging on recyclers. And I talked to a friend of mine who works with a recycler in San Francisco saying, we have trouble making money in the recycling. But guess what? Our composting, making money hand over fist. In fact, our composting is keeping us afloat. So, you know, there are potential benefits of the type of sorting we're talking about that can be paid for through other revenue streams. So I think when you look at things holistically, there may be a solution to this problem.
We're running a bit late. Two quick ones.
We've got several people who want questions, so if we can be real sort of brief questions, brief answers, we'll get as many voices in as we can.
Speak less.
Hi, Conrad McCarran with As You Sow. I wonder if you apply the concept of highest and best use when you're doing the investment analysis I think what comes to mind now is we're all aware of the new lexicon of the circular economy, and you want to use the plastic, it seems to me, many, many times. And obvious example is trying to put bottles back into bottles versus other kinds of materials where they might only have 1 or 2 more lives.
We have a whole section in the report on the circular economy. We think that is going to be a very interesting area for investment opportunities. You know, I think there's a technological component and there's a societal component about how consumers use and manage things. I think if we change to plastic as a service rather than, you know, selling the plastic as such, I think we're going to get some more of those circular economy type business models. There's a few of them out there, not nearly enough. We need entrepreneurs coming up with more of these circular economy business models. And that applies not just to plastics, it applies to everything, right? You know, take food waste, no matter what you talk about in waste, there's a potential circular economy output, and I think we're going to start seeing more of that. And you know, with the power of technology that we have now, with the Ubers and Lyfts, and you know, the sharing economy that hasn't yet emerged that everybody talks about, you know, there are some technological solutions that may facilitate the circular economy and make it possible like it wasn't possible 5 years ago. So I'm very bullish on that too.
Okay, hi, my name's Miranda. I guess I wanted to bring up what my company is doing because it seems like the solution that everyone here is asking about. So recycling cannot be the only way to deal with plastic waste. There has to be new conversion technology because you will always have low-value residue and low-value plastics. MRFs are struggling in America right now because the number 3 through 7 mixed fails. 1 and 2 plastics are very valuable, and that is going to be the case no matter what your oil prices are. So my company is developing a chemical process where actually we just recently invented this. We've shown early success in the laboratory at a small scale below 1 liter. It's a chemical process that can take mixed plastics. We shred plastics that are from waste post-consumer sources. So this is numbers 4 through 7 plastics. So we can actually do everything except for PVC right now. So that's PET, LDP, HDPE, PS,
Fantastic.
and also polypropylene. And we can also take that with paper contamination and food contamination. And we've developed a multi-stage chemical process in what's called a PAR reactor, a pressure reactor, that has multiple stages and goes through a raise in temperature process and can take, you know, the amount of plastics we have right now within 3 hours. We've reduced that amount from a previously 20 years ago reported 16 hours down to 3-hour cycle, and we can now turn into 3 major things. First thing is biochar, which can be used fertilizer. That's what the food and the paper is converted into. The second is a liquid alcohol and sugar solution that can be used for other things like biofuels, and we are also exploring other applications. But the major valuable products that we're making, which differentiates us from a more high temperature and energy intensive process like pyrolysis, which turns plastics to oil, the major product we produce are as a mixture of 4 different target acids or dibasic organic acids. And they can be used to make virgin plastic polymers, including polyurethanes and nylons, just to begin with. They can also be used to replace petrochemical, virgin petrochemical, in things like paints, in actual plasticizers, as well as in pH modifiers to adjust temperature and pH in sewage and also textile treatment. So there's a variety of industrial applications what we're bringing the plastics down into. The issue with recycling is that we take the plastics and we just physically kind of, you know, we mix them and then we kind of melt them and string them out into this resin product. That is not a good enough way if you want to maintain your structural integrity. And you're always going to have darker and darker coloration with every recycling generation. And in the end, when your plastic is black, MRF optical density sensors can no longer detect them. So your plastic recycling process is always a downward cascade until it gets to a landfill or some sort of natural habitat leakage. So there has to be real upcycling technologies. And when you're talking about turning something into, you know, what we have right now since World War II is pyrolysis, and that's directly competing with fuel. That's not good enough. So I wanted to share our technology here with you because it is something that we believe has a tremendous amount of potential, and we're actually working with various universities, also Dow Chemical. We're starting discussions, and we recently entered into a 15-month trial to do R&D with real MRF material from green waste recovery in San Jose with the San Jose City as well. And on another note, when you were talking about Indonesia's waste problem, I was actually just in Indonesia for 3 weeks, and I spent a lot of time in the Serangan landfill, which is located right beside the airport there. And we flew a drone 120 meters above the ground, and we couldn't even see more than one boundary at a time. That was how large. And the local villagers had cows grazing on the plastics. So the problem how it looks in those 5 countries, very different from what it looks like in our world here. And a technology like ours would need a lot of new technologies around the collection, the other further upstream things for us to be able to operate on that material. My company's name is called BioSelection. We're based in San Jose, California.
Thank you.
So this is, Miranda, this is great, right? This is music to my investors, yes, and I'm sure to you as well, Ricardo. We should talk. I think as you get bigger, as your financing needs get bigger, and you're looking for investors, you should reach out to folks like me. And
okay, we have one more over here.
Yeah.
We've got to keep running.
I just wanted to say real quick, I've been to several of these conferences now talking about recycling, and I think one of the things that we can kind of do to turn around the way that people are looking at this problem is to kind of change the way that we look at these types of value chains. I mean, right now, recycling is always at the very end of the value chain. It's what gets collected with trash and cardboard. And in a lot of cases, we take these materials, we push them to the end, and then they become the problem as the last thing that we're trying to figure out what to do with. Instead of looking at them at the beginning and saying, how can we actually design products to use recycled materials to increase the value of these recycled materials, we end up with them at the end of the value chain, and we're always looking at how to take cost out. We have to take cost out, and maybe looking at a way to try and drive value into the material in the first place and design products. We talk about design for recycling, but it's always how do we design to make it easier to recycle, as opposed to how do we design to actually utilize recycling more effectively. And I think that would be an interesting and different way to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. We did talk a little bit about this is this way for a PowerPoint presentation, but in our report we talk about the need for the circular thinking here and designing better. I do think one of the areas that we had the least visibility into was in the product design as part of this value chain, which I think is a tremendous opportunity as well in making better use of plastic.
Great. Well, with that, I think we'll be around at the break.